Thank you so very, very much. The older I get, the harder it is to give speeches because there's so much I want to share with you. And so it just means so much to me to receive you and to be here and just being treated with such generosity and kindness from the moment I got off the airplane. So thank you. And Barbara's going to help me because because I have a hard time thinking of who should go next. And if you would help, Barbara. People are going to walk up, so maybe I can do this.
We have a request that you will use the podium mic for the quality of the response.
Okay.
So we'll ask you again, if you'd like to ask a question, to come to the mics in the middle of the aisle so that we can capture your question on our recording and on the streaming video. And as we've been doing at recent Humanities Center events, we would ask that you do indeed ask a question and that you limit your intervention to a minute or a minute and a half so that we can assure as much participation as possible. Thank you. I'll just step aside and I'll help run traffic if we need it.
Okay, sorry, I've forgotten the setup here. Thank you.
Welcome, thank you. I'd like to be interested in hearing your comments on two topics, population, and the other one with regards to corporations living endlessly, you might say.
Thank you. Two extremely important questions. Population first. I wrote a little book in the, excuse me, in the 1980s called Taking Population Seriously. You asked the question, right? Taking Population Seriously, in which I laid out the frame that rapid population growth, unsustainable population growth, is a symptom of exactly the powerlessness that is also the root of hunger and so much other misery, and that we can only bring population into balance with the regenerative powers of nature itself as we address the concentration of power that is embedded in so many of the cultural frames that, such as I described tonight here. So that is the overall approach. That is not an independent variable; it is a dependent variable. And I think attempts, notwithstanding that, yes, absolutely, there's been, as you probably know, a great drop-off in help for family planning for around the world, which is a great human tragedy because so many births are, something about 40%, I believe, of births are unintended, unintended pregnancies. And as we fall off, our obligation, I think, to help to spread the capacity for people to choose the size of their families, that is a great, great setback for human freedom and human dignity. But I think that we can only really bring population into balance as we create these, what I would call living democracy policies and cultures. As far as the corporation, I decided not to get into that, so I'm glad you asked, because I do believe ultimately, and many people, you probably know those who are working on to challenge the presumption that kind of grew over time through precedent and now been affirmed in January by the Supreme Court decision on corporate participation in elections, that corporations are being afforded many of the rights that most human beings, and 80% of Americans think should only be rights of real living and breathing humans. And so I think that ultimately we do need clarification in a constitutional amendment to clarify that corporations, what rights they do and don't have is different from different from human beings, and to make that super clear. However, I feel very strongly that we cannot wait for that in order to free our democracy from the grip of corporate control. And so therefore I would urge us to all support Representative Markey and others who are pushing for legislation that we require any corporation that contributes to an election campaign to get a vote of its shareholders beforehand and that it be totally transparent. And I think if we can move that along, that's much easier to do than any kind of constitutional convention or constitutional amendment. And if we can move that along, and because there is such outrage, 80%, as I say, of Americans object to the Supreme Court decision in January that unleashed corporate spending in elections. And I think that most corporations would be very wary of asking for a vote of shareholders on a political candidate, because they want us to buy their products and invest in them, and I think that would be a very risky proposition. So I think there are things we can do right now to seriously blunt the impact of that decision, and we must. So I really appreciate both of those important questions. Thank you. Okay.
And there's one other point. Could you tell people that if they can't get to the mic or choose not to, we'll bring them one?
Okay. And so 2 points, I'm going to go back and forth between these two mics, and then there is a portable mic, so if someone chooses not to stand up or is unable to stand up, the mic can be taken to you. So I'll go back to the back then.
Okay, thank you. I see it as we're getting better and worse at the same time, which makes it very confusing. But you mentioned about secrecy. I think a bigger problem than secrecy is most of what's going on is publicly known, but we are in denial because it's scary and it's fearful. And that denial, the F word, how much fascism does we have to get before we admit that that's where it is? And you want to talk about vision, I'll just point one thing out. We once had a president who called off the arms race and the space race and said we should redirect military resources for the public good of the planet. And he was removed from office in a military coup 2 months later. And that's why our politics is broken. And the Democrats are afraid to talk about this, and most of our society is afraid to talk about this. And that's the ugly cancer that's at the root of why politics doesn't work. I'm not disappointed that Obama's putting more Monsanto people in at the FDA. He's funded by Wall Street. The question is the deeper paradigm of denial that, the question's implicit.
Well, is the question, I got the question, isn't the deeper paradigm here denial? And I agree that fear is the spiral of powerlessness creates a culture of fear, and I probably should have stressed that even more in my talk, because I think that, and you'll see in Getting a Grip that I talk about the spiral of fear that keeps us in denial. And so I very, very much agree that fear and denial is deep in us. But I think that we don't come out of denial by being talked at and being accused of anything. That's just not a pathway to freeing ourselves from denial. And so I think that the more that we each can share, remember we are all teachers. If the mirror neurons thing is true, that as I'm doing this, there are parts of your brain that are doing this. Everybody who's watching us is learning from us. And so as we step out and show a way, walking with our fear, coming out of our denial because we learn that we can walk with fear, other people see that. And I see it as I was talking to students today, so many of them doing such creative things for environmental sustainability on their campus, on this campus. And so I think that is the way to get us out of denial, is to show it through our actions, show others, and convince ourselves there is another way. That is, I think, believing is seeing, and people have to believe there is another way. And so that is living it ourselves and telling these stories of possibility, I think, is key to help us get beyond our denial. So thank you very much for that.